Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me and Leanna's library as we talk about our TBR Switch. So I gave Leanna 4 books, she gave me 4 books, and today we are going to be talking about the 4 books I gave Leanna. Leanna, do you want to introduce yourself real quick, just in case some people don't know you? I mean, we do a lot of lives, so I feel like everyone knows you, but just in case.
I'm Liene of Liena's Library, and I have a booktube channel that
You like Abercrombie? That's
I love
it.
yeah. I mean, Abercrombie is like 99% of my personality. But I did wear the other 1% of my personality, the sweatshirt that Hillary gave me,
Oh,
repping Six of Crows.
I should have worn the one you gave me,
So you can wear
Pride
it
and
tomorrow.
Prejudice, except I filmed a bunch of videos in it, so then it felt weird to wear it again.
You can wear it tomorrow.
I'll wear it tomorrow. So I gave you 4 books. I was too lazy to get 2 of them off my shelf because they're really high, but
no one think that this stacking means anything. I stacked them by size. So here they all
Oh, there,
are.
you have them all. I gave her Warbreaker, I gave her the Paper Menagerie, I gave her Bad Feminist, and This Is How You Lose the Timewar. Before we get started, let's be clear. I really like these books. Leanna may not like some of these books. I know I have some super fans. You have to be nice. I will be blocking liberally if people get mean. This is fun. Leanna and I have a Venn diagram of books we like and also a Venn diagram of books we don't like, and we're still friends, and it's fine. So be mature, everybody, in the comments. That's all I have to say about that. What should we start with?
I don't know if you want to get everyone's guesses for everything or a particular book, or
I think we should do 1 book at a time. Guesses
right,
for 1 book at a time.
Host's choice. What do you want to talk about first?
Well, we'll do Warbreaker second because I think people are the most interested in that one. I just am really excited to talk to you about the Paper Menagerie. So let's start with the Paper Menagerie by
I would
Ken
just like
Liu.
to say that Zach has no faith in your ability to pick books for me.
I think there's a real chance that Leanna always hates everything. So that's what everyone says.
I also always think that there's a good chance that I hate everything I'm reading.
So what is Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu? Now, I gave you this book because I loved it. I'm a big Liu fan. I'm becoming more and more and more of his fan. If you guys follow my channel, I've read the Dandelion Dynasty and all that stuff. But I like giving people short stories as a way to get into him because the Dandelion Dynasty is quite a commitment. What I didn't warn you, no one warned me that this wrecks you. And so it personally wrecked me emotionally. And that's why I gave it to you, because I'm rude and wanted you to also potentially be wrecked emotionally. So everyone give me guesses in the comments what you thought Leanna thought of the Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Let us know. Everyone just wants you to start with Warbreaker. I get it. We'll do that one second. Let's see. PJ said he thinks you liked Menagerie. Matt has quit trying to predict you.
I have also quit trying to predict me.
Emily also thinks you're going to love it. Everyone thinks you were also wrecked by it. Oh, except Darren thinks you hated it. Liked it, 4 stars. Okay, most people think you liked it. Evie spoiled it because Evie saw the vlog. I also watched the vlog before. Okay, Leanna, what was the verdict?
I loved it.
Yay! This is actually the one I was the most confident in giving you. Like, it's grim. It's good writing.
I like being happy sometimes too.
It's Rob's favorite book. Good choice. Okay. Spill then. I'm really so glad you like it. Well, I watched your vlog where you cried a lot, which was also me. I cried through a lot of this book, which is rare for me.
Which, like you said, you did not warn me that this would be. I don't think a short story collection has ever made me cry. Because usually, that's my thing. Was my complaint about short stories is that as good as they are, it's too short to like really like have time with it to like feel invested and to like get to know it and to like connect with it, even if it is really, really good. And apparently Ken Liu is the exception.
Yeah, I mean, because that's true. Because even like the short story collections I love by Ted Chiang, they're more like conceptual is the reason I love them. They don't necessarily like gut me. And someone was saying they read the title story and were yes, the title story, the Paper Menagerie, is the one that really wrecked me. And that's the one that made you, I think, cry the most too.
Yeah, I thought I was crying a lot with the Literomancer, and then I read the Paper Menagerie, and it was just a mess.
It is, we're not going to spoil, but it is sad in a way. All of his stories are sad. Something you said in the blog, like in such a true way, like they just hit every sort of like emotional trigger somehow that you have as a human.
And if they don't hit you that way, you're not human. You heard it here, folks.
Yeah, this is the opposite of our Norwegian Wood, where we didn't trust people if they liked it. This is like, if you don't feel emotional about this, then I no longer also trust you. Like, you don't have enough human emotions. So what were your favorite stories if you had to narrow it down?
Well, I mean, I feel like the instinct is always to say that something that like hits you so hard that it makes you cry, then like that's your favorite. So like obviously Paper Menagerie and Literomancer, I mean, wrecked me. And I mean, I probably remember them the most vividly because they wrecked me. But the very first story was like a great opener, The Bookmaking Habits of Select Species, which I also talked about in the vlog, because it really reminded me of reading like anthropological, like ethnographic surveys that are like pulling from different cultures, like specifically trying to, you know, pinpoint information about a particular thing, in this case, bookmaking, except it's about aliens.
Yeah.
So it felt like pulling from ethnographies about various aliens and comparing and contrasting the ways that their cultures approach bookmaking. So like for me specifically, I was like, I don't know who else would enjoy this story, but I really liked this.
Yeah, that one was a good one. I didn't connect to it quite as much, but then there was one that I liked, I think, more than you, which was State Change. Although I always joke that I like State Change so much because it's the only one that's not horribly depressing. Like the first story that you just said and that one, I think, are the only two that aren't like.
It lulls you into a false sense of security. Those first two stories were like, okay, cool, interesting, speculative, and then wham with the feelings.
Oh, I have to see. This is why I have the book with me, because even though I read it recently, I don't remember all the titles.
Well, Good Hunting was the one that I very wrongly predicted would be something like The Most Dangerous Game. It is nothing like The Most Dangerous Game.
Yeah, Good Hunting was really good. I think Liana and I both felt the same about that one, which was like, I really liked the concept, but it didn't engage me quite as much as the others. Like I had a harder time like engaging with it, even though I ultimately liked it.
Yeah. It wasn't, I mean, I feel like some of the other ones, because they're more mysterious or more, I don't know, dark things, I just feel like it's one of those like you can't look away, like you have to know. And this one, it was a very sort of like distantly beautiful. I don't know if that kind of like when you read more like fairy tale or a mythology retelling type of things that feel kind of arm's length.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was just a little bit more arm's length, while some of the other ones were like deep in the trenches. What did you feel about the last one, The Man Who Ended History, I think is what it was called?
I think, I mean, the competition is high for this, but I feel like it might be the darkest story in the whole collection.
Yeah, and because of that, weirdly, it was probably one of my favorites. I always say the State Change, the Paper Menagerie, and that one, or Mono No Aware, were my favorites. The thing about The Man Who Ended History, a documentary, was I didn't know about that history. Like somehow I didn't know about it. So then
that's kind of his point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that is the point. That's what it was so haunting for me. And then after
the same like the Litigation Master is also about like true-ish events, and I was like, after that I was like, well, that was pretty dark and true, only to be followed. It's kind of like Literomancer to Paper Menagerie. I'm like, that's super dark, only to be outdone later by another story.
When you said that, when I was watching your vlog about it, you're like, well, that one, I don't know if it can get much darker. And I was like, oh, she's got the last one left. Like, just wait.
Spoke too soon.
Yeah, I am. So it was really weird reading that and then like seeing all of the historical references after, and I kind of looked some of them up. And just like that one hit me even more, because it's like, well, look, here I am, an American who didn't know all this history, which is something Liu talks about a lot. Like he really likes to bring Chinese history in a very accessible way to the West.
It reminded me a lot of reading the Poppy War and learning about the like historical events that it's obviously not historical fiction, like it's a fantasy, but she's heavily drawing on the same way that Ken Liu does, where like this isn't historical fiction, but it's like basically telling you about true events.
True events through the lens of fantasy, really.
Yeah, I mean, well, like in his, it is our world with like a speculative like element added. With like the Poppy War, it's literally a fantasy world. Like it's not our world, but she's still recreating the circumstances that really did exist in our world, which is like, I mean, as dark as any book is, it's always darker if you find out that, oh, that actually happened.
Yes, yes. And so all the references at the end and his footnotes just make it. Yeah, and that's same Monica. Like I started Googling so much and I actually wanted to start reading some of his stuff that he was inspired by. But yeah, I'm so glad you liked it. It is funny, when I read it, I like posted on my Instagram, like, everyone read the Paper Menagerie. It's great. And then the narrator was like, it was not fun. And everyone's like, oh, did you not like it? I was like, no, I love it. But like, you guys are just like, it's such a good book. And then I read it and like sobbed for like most of the stories. And I just don't cry normally in books. But anyway.
I mean, I do cry in books, not like always, but I feel like you'd have to be a heart of stone to not get a bit, at least a little misty-eyed.
Like feel it at least a little
Yeah.
bit. So good. I'm really glad you liked it. Does it make you more likely to check out Dandelion Dynasty?
Oh, 100. I mean, I already own Grace of Kings. I've owned it for a while and I've just like meant to read it. But now having read these short stories, I suspected that I would probably like that series, even though I know nothing about what it's about.
Yeah.
But yeah, now having read, because the thing is with a short story collection, like you get a greater sampling of the types of writing that an author is capable of. And so in that sense, it's a good taster. So like, I don't know exactly which of these stories is most similar in vibe and tone and in prose style to the Dandelion Dynasty, but there was not a weak story in the bunch. So whatever style he's gone with for Dandelion Dynasty will be great.
But you know, it's just going to be sad.
I mean, am I going to cry as much reading those books as I cried reading this?
No. I think Grace of Kings feels more grim in the way that regular fantasy for me is grim, which is like, it is very grim, but isn't quite as like directly to your heart of what humanity is. Because it's a little bit more like fantasy in nature. But I mean, there were parts that I put the book down. There was a part in the second book where I literally put it down and had to take a break for like a day because it was just so heavy.
And so I feel like a couple people have said that the fourth one is like full on grimdark.
The fourth one's not out yet.
Don't people have arcs of it though?
Yes, but I don't know that many. I mean, I know a few. Like I have an arc of it. I'm going to read it in like a week after I finish Jade War. Jade War. But I would be surprised. I bet they say that about the third one, because the third one just came out and a lot of people had arcs and it was really grim in a lot of ways. The only reason I wonder is because when I interviewed Ken Liu, he said that he's a hopeful person and he wants to end things on hope. And so I'm like hoping that is, but now that I'm saying that out loud and thinking about the Paper Menagerie, I'm like, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, ending things on hope sometimes makes you cry even more.
Yeah, that's true.
It's and like, I also like, I think, I mean, this is like a whole bigger other conversation, but just like the way humans are wired, like you can't really comprehend things that are like on a grand scale. Like you can't really internalize that in the way that you can a very small human to human experience. So like the darkest stories are probably the last two, which are about huge atrocities that are like, you know, obviously that's way worse than what happens in Paper Menagerie or the Literomancer, even though like quite sad things happen in those stories. But I mean, even that, so Literomancer is a sadder story than the Paper Menagerie, but I did not cry as much in that as I did for Paper Menagerie, because like it's the ones that like really connect and make you like, that you can really feel like you understand this experience in a way that is real, and as opposed to like conceptual, like, yes, people dying is bad and the numbers you're telling me are horrendous, but like I can't like feel that the way that I feel an individual person telling me this individual experience that I can like imagine living that.
I mean, it's the same reason why we'll cry at a single person dying close to us, but not at war atrocities on the news, even if we feel very affected. It's that personal. I think you're right, because the Paper Menagerie, without spoiling, is this like very personal story. It is following a very personal experience that I think is very easy to relate to on multiple levels in many different ways. But let's see. I wanted to say She Was Only Evie was asking if we're going to read the Hidden Girl collection. I do plan on reading that. That's his other short story collection.
From context clues, I was guessing.
I haven't heard as much about that one, so I don't really know as much about it. I don't think it's as depressing from what I've heard, but I want to finish the rest of the Dandelion Dynasty before.
The Paper Menagerie, the story won awards, right?
It actually is the first short story to win all 3 Hugo, Nebula, and World Fantasy Awards.
But it wasn't
or it might be the only work. It might just be the only work that won all 3, which I think is super deserved. Just wow. The titular story is so good. The funny thing about that story is I was teary-eyed through most of it, but by the last 3 pages, I think it is, sobbing.
This is such an unassuming, benign, arguably boring cover. Like, there's no hint. There's no way to tell from this cover that this book is going to traumatize you, from like learning about real world events to like personal human interest stories that is just absolutely going to wreck you every possible way. Like, it's just this cover, it needs warnings.
It needs, yeah. But it's almost better not to, because it really does take you by surprise. And especially, like you said, the first 2 stories are so unemotional compared to the other ones.
Well,
I think
so
it's
like
the first 2.
Neil Gaiman has a collection of short stories called Trigger Warning. And honestly, that title belongs on this collection. I'm sorry, Gaiman. Nothing you wrote about was as like, as this.
Because I read Trigger Warning too, and it is funny because there are things in it. Like, I get why he called it that. But yes, you actually will be triggered when you read this book and not when you read that one.
And I mean, I think he named it that more to be like tongue-in-cheek, kind of like the book equivalent of clickbait. Not that he really thought that every story would be truly triggering, but yeah.
No, I thought that was the point. But yes, a therapy bell, or just a content warning. Like, they have like explicit tags on music. Like, there needs to be that, but for emotional trauma.
I propose an alternate cover for this. You know the cover of A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara?
No, I'll look it up.
Because that should be the cover of this book.
Okay, The Little Life?
A Little Life.
Oh, A Little Life. Okay. Life book. Let's see. Oh, yeah. It's just someone crying. Is that the one you're talking about?
Someone bawling their eyes out.
Yes.
That should be the cover. See, that's a book that has a cover that warns you about what's going to happen to you if you read that book.
I don't know. What would you think, Liana? I never listened to anything. So what would you say on the listening side?
I listened to a ton of stuff, and I tried listening to this on audiobook, and it's not, I mean, the narrator's fine, but I immediately was like, no, I don't want to do this on audiobook. Partly because like short stories are so like in and out that by the time that you've like settled into the flow of one, which you kind of even more so need with an audiobook, you're already out. And then I had listened to the first story and started the second story. And in particular, the second story, it has like subsections that have like titles. And when it started doing that, I had thought that the previous story must have ended and we were now in a new story. And then I was like, wait, no, this sounds, is it like connected to the first one? This still sounds like it's part of the first story. So like, it was very like disorienting listening to it on audiobook. I'm like, maybe if you read along, like listen and read at the same time, which I never do because that I can't do that.
Oh my goodness, something we agree on. That blows my mind that people do that immersive reading. No, thank you.
Yeah, when people like I've tried doing that, and all my brain is thinking about is matching the sound to the sight and just like matching, and making sure it keeps matching. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening in the story right now. I'm just thinking about matching the word I'm hearing to the word I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, that sounds terrible. So, okay, that was the Paper Menagerie. You loved it. I'm so happy. That was the one I was pretty confident on, though. Like, I was pretty positive. It's the way that you felt about one of the books you gave me that you were like, well, I was pretty sure you were going to feel a way about it. And then I did feel almost directly the way you thought I would feel about it. So
it's almost like we kind of know each other.
It is. Maybe. Now, to make everyone happy, we will go to Warbreaker next. People are super excited.
I'm afraid that's not next in my stack. That's okay.
Oh, people are so excited to hear what you thought about Warbreaker. So if you're new.
Why is my copy nicer than yours?
Well, first of all, I have the leather bound. So I could go grab that.
Well, then.
Also, this one, because it is my favorite, is personally signed. So I don't care if it looks bad. It is the copy that I like, Liene. Okay. And I've read it a lot. It's loved. I like loving my books. Also, I wanted to get you a paperback because I didn't think you were going to really like it, but they didn't have it. So I just bought the hardcover. And I wanted to give you a hardcover of This Is How You Lose the Timewar because it's prettier and they didn't have it. So anyway.
It's okay. I appreciate it. It's the thought that counts.
It's the thought that counts. Warbreaker. So I'm a huge Brandon Sanderson fan. Liene is not. She likes a few of his stuff, but dislikes a lot of his stuff. And so the joke was that I gave her this and said, there's a 95% chance you'll hate this, but it's my TBR. So I get to do what I want.
You chose violence.
And I chose violence. And Warbreaker is actually my favorite Sanderson, which is a very unpopular opinion within the Sanderson fandom. So I will give you that. Like, people often don't like this one as much as like Stormlight.
What is the like most typically favorite Sanderson book among Sanderson fans?
I would say Words of Radiance is probably the most likely touted as number one, and maybe The Emperor's Soul, which is high on, both of those are high on the list for me, but I don't think you've read either of those. I actually almost gave you The Emperor's Soul. It's a novella, because if anything, I think you actually would have a chance of liking that.
Is that, I mean, I know they're all connected, but which one is that one connected more to, like Stormlight or Mistborn? It's technically
connected to Elantris, but you would never know. It's like in a wildly different time and place, and has a completely different magic system. That one, I almost got it because I actually think you might like that one. Like, that's when I'd be like, I think you would actually like this.
You were like, Liene will like this, Liene will hate this. Which do I choose? Violence!
But just because I love Warbreaker, I chose violence. So people are guessing. Let's see. She said that she was meh about it, gave it 3 stars, and she's going to try more. Okay, so that was your first one. I will say, Shauna, like, a lot of people are meh on Warbreaker. So
when did in your like Sanderson journey, was this one of the first Sanderson books you read?
No, it wasn't. So I read all 3 Mistborn and the first 2. Oh no, and the first Stormlight. This was a long time ago, so not much of his stuff was out. Oh, and Elantris. So I was
wondering if this was one of those where like it was your first and like it'll always be your fave kind of like situation.
It wasn't at all. So yeah, I think it was the 4th. I actually didn't want to read this because I read the back of this book and thought it sounded so stupid. Like, I read it and was like, excuse me, this has so much. How could all these things come together? So I only read it because my husband was like, no, I think you'll really like this one. And then I did. I loved it. So that's why. So let's see. Warbreaker is his favorite behind Stormlight. People are liking it. They're just not telling me how you feel about it. She was only Evie as being hopeful and saying you might have actually liked it.
I think people are afraid to say what they think that I'm going to think.
People think they're going to like it. PJ thinks you'll be meh about it. Other people are saying Stormlight's up here. Yeah, Stormlight's most Sanderson fans' favorite, I would say.
Well, I definitely have heard that within Stormlight that Words of Radiance is the favorite. I didn't know that Words of Radiance outside of Stormlight is also the favorite.
I think so. I think people usually just say Stormlight in general, but I would say that's the one I hear the most, or Way of Kings. Or, I mean, one of the Stormlights usually. People do put the Emperor's Soul high usually. Mistborn is high. I would say Warbreaker is usually in the middle. Elantris is usually at the end for most people.
Yeah, I DNF'd Elantris.
Yeah, it's Elantris. I love how it ends, but to me, it is so clearly his first published novel. Like, even as a huge Sanderson fan, I'm like, this is your first published novel, and I can tell. Like, you know, I think she hated it. I like that because you live where he lives, you feel like you have to try again, as if he will personally know because you live in the same state as him. Okay, so Liene, who was the closest? I'm leaving this comment up for a reason.
I low-key hated it, but like operative word low-key hated it. I had very mixed feelings.
Yeah, this was the one. We ended up, at first we were trying to hide our feelings from each other, and we did sometimes, but like Warbreaker and Strange the Dreamer for you were the two that we were like, we're just going to tell each other right away how we felt. And you had told me like you felt so mixed to the point where you said you didn't even know how to rate it when you first finished it. Has it changed? Because you finished that one a while ago, I feel like.
It was the first one that I read.
It was the first one you read. Yeah, okay. So you finished it a while ago and you said you were really mixed. Like, has it sorted out how you feel about it? No. Okay.
I mean, I let on Goodreads, I marked it read and unrated, and I don't know what to rate it.
Yeah, no, so just tell us what you thought about it, because I think it's actually kind of funnier to me that you're confused by it. Like confused to dislike. Like it's a dislike confusion, but it's not. You said like you liked it better than Stormlight. Was that still true?
So like it's weird because like we talk in general a lot about like how to rate books and like what goes into rating it, and like people who claim to be like objective raters are lying either to themselves or to everyone else. That's impossible. So like it's always an emotional experience as well as experience that you try to quantify in some way and make sense of. And so like comparing it to my experience reading Way of Kings, I like would say that the experience of going through this book was a more pleasurable experience than getting through Way of Kings. But there were things about it that I hated a lot more than anything in Way of Kings. So I was like, I wasn't like beating my head against a wall reading this the way I was with Way of Kings. Like I was like, it goes pretty fast. And like I was like entertained by, multiple parts of it. But at the same time, like I was very angry other things in it that I was like, but so it's, like, I guess Way of Kings, even though I would probably rate it lower, was okay. So, Way of Kings was baffling to me, and Warbreaker was like aggravating. Is the only way.
You preferred the book that gave you an emotion of aggravation versus confusion?
Yeah. So like, okay, like basically, so like I'm saying if you said I had to reread one of these, I mean, my initial response would be like Way of Kings because it's been way longer. I wouldn't want to immediately reread Warbreaker, but like let's say years have passed, and I have to reread one of these, I would reread Warbreaker before I would reread Way of Kings.
Okay.
But not like
so if you were stuck on a desert island and those were the only two books, I know which one you'd read now.
Yeah. But I would be very sad to be stuck on an island with only those two books.
Is there anything you can say about it? Because I know one of the things you really can't say, it's a big spoiler, one of the things we talked about the most. But is there anything you can say that's not necessarily a super big spoiler, or maybe characters that you liked more than others, or characters you disliked a lot that's not spoilery?
So, well, this is where, again, like, I don't know. I felt like the characters, since I guess we're just doing this because the Way of Kings is the one that I famously hated. Often, like the characters, I was just like bored out of my mind with them, and like, I mean, I would be frustrated and angry, and I would say things were dumb about it. But like, mostly, I was just like, ugh. Whereas the characters in Warbreaker, a lot of things that they would say or do, or the way they were portrayed, like, infuriated me, but also a lot of things they said and did and how they were portrayed were much more entertaining than Way of Kings. So it's my mom's favorite expression, or one of her favorite expressions, is love me or hate me, but don't ignore me. And I feel like there's a lot of love and a lot of hate. Well, love is a bit strong, but like I was, I don't know, more not invested, but engaged by Warbreaker on like positive and negative levels, and the like with higher highs and way lower lows, which I feel like balances out to a higher rating than Way of Kings, which was just like an utter baffling slog to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I had said, because if I'm correct, you really didn't like Lightsong.
Well, yeah, no, I don't. But at the same time, he was much more entertaining.
And you liked some of the stuff that like he said, but going into it, I thought Lightsong is the thing that's going to really break Liana. Like I went in thinking like Lightsong is going to be the problem. And so like, at least I knew that much. One thing without saying too much, like that I liked about the story is I think Vivenna is very interesting as a character and infuriating. Like she infuriated me as a character, but also interested me the most in the end, probably, of all the characters. So how did you feel about her and her arc, if you can without spoilering?
There's a siren outside. Hang on.
Oh, I like it. It's perfect. It's like
They're coming for me.
Yeah, she called the police because she's like, save me.
Oh no, I think everyone else called the authorities and has gonna have me committed for not liking it. I feel, well, again, like Vivenna was a character where like I was like, this is a character that I should like, but there's so many things about her and how she's written that I also hate. So that's again where I was like, on the surface of like your function in the story and the type, like archetypally, like the type of character that you are would be something that I would view favorably or would be more inclined to like. But then I don't know, I am more disappointed when something that I should like fails on some level. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think when I kind of figure you and Sanderson at this point, I think two things. Like one, I think you like some of Sanderson's ideas, but just really don't like the way he executes things. Like that's what it seems like to me, is like execution. Because you even said like some of the ideas he explores in Warbreaker are things that you really love being explored in the Age of Madness trilogy with Joe Abercrombie, but you just so much like Abercrombie's execution of things. So I think that's interesting, that I think a lot of it is just like execution that you just don't like about him. And I also think it's interesting that you tend to like his technically more YA series. Mistborn is like on the line, and then Skyward.
Well, it shocks me that Mistborn, I think Mistborn is, of what I've read, like tonally the darkest. And it just shocks me that that's the one that's like sometimes marketed as YA. Because like that too, like when I read Mistborn and then read Way of Kings, because I had read Mistborn first, and it was like sometimes regarded as YA and like good, but like not his best, that I should read Way of Kings because like that's a like full on adult and it's his best yet. And I was like, this feels much more childish than Mistborn.
And I think that is interesting because I've always been hard on the like Mistborn is not a YA book. I think I'm like, it's very dark if you read between the lines, just because it's not explicit, you know, but there's some dark stuff, especially in my opinion, in Well of Ascension. But
Well of Ascension is my favorite in the trilogy.
Well of Ascension is your favorite of the three. But I do think it's interesting. Yeah, anyway, and see, look, you got somebody, because it's like your people who are saying like he doesn't like execution.
Well, I mean, like I jokingly said, and like I know you got in trouble for your jokey thumbnail as regards Sanderson and the author I'm about to mention, Patrick Rothfuss. But I like somewhat jokingly have been known to say that like Sanderson can come up with the magic system and Patrick Rothfuss can write it. Which obviously, like, I don't think either of these gentlemen would be interested in participating in such a project.
This is just a thought process. We are not saying anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, even when I read Way of Kings and Elantris and Warbreaker, a lot of the times I'm like, okay, like you've come up with something that's like definitely like out of the box. Like this doesn't feel like it's mimicking or it's not derivative of like, oh, okay, this is the magic that we've seen like pretty much every fantasy have. Like it's thinking outside the box, so like credit where it's due. But then I just feel like the way that it's handled and the way that it's described and like the way people interact with it
is his dialogue, which is something pretty much everyone, even Super Sander fans, agree isn't where it's at, like we all know. But I think it bothers you a lot more. Like I think if you're a Sanderson fan, it's just something that doesn't bother you, but I think you as a reader it does bother. This is an interesting question. How does Warbreaker compare to Skyward? Because Liana likes Skyward way better than Warbreaker, and I like Warbreaker way better than Skyward. So, Eric, whoever you think you agree more with reading-wise.
There you go. Well, this is also where, I mean, I think I said this about Skyward too, that I'm like, okay, but this is YA. So then when the dialogue is kind of childish or when the behavior is kind of immature or things aren't like that fully explored, I'm like, okay, but this is YA. So like,
yeah, Warbreaker is definitely an adult novel. Skyward is clearly a YA novel. Like there's no guess there. Like he is marketed Skyward to YA. Warbreaker is very marketed to the adult community. So that's like, Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like Rothfuss, like I don't think there's anything particularly well. I mean, okay, that's saying
No, I talked about
there's
it before.
very
Rothfuss, if you take away his amazing prose, the story, if
it's
you
pretty
just
derivative.
listed out the story, it's not anything. It's the way he tells the story that is interesting, which I don't think is any less valuable. It's just two very different approaches.
Right, which is why like I don't actually like realistically like want to pitch to these guys, hey, you should work together. Like,
Yes.
I don't think that would work the way that like I mean Pratchett and Gaiman work together. Like, great. I don't think Sanderson and Patrick Rothfuss should work together. But like that like theoretical combining of efforts where like one of you can think outside the box and invent like wild concepts, but then the other one knows how to marry like a concept with like a human experience in a way that like we're really gonna like delve into like
I mean, I have said like I would be so interested in like a short story collection with a lot of duos like that, where it would just be interesting to explore. Because I thought all the time about like Abercrombie and Sanderson, who literally write polar opposite stories. Like, what would that look like if they came together and Sanderson came up with the idea and Abercrombie wrote it? Like, what would happen? I think is such an interesting thought experiment. Just like because you have Pratchett and Gaiman who really did come together in such like a fantastic way, but it made more sense, I think, because Gaiman, although Gaiman does write weird, like he has a sense of humor in all of his works. It's not as bold or like in your face as Pratchett's, who writes just satire, but you see how their humor is like.
And like I could see Gaiman collaborating with Ken Liu on short stories. Like they have similar, like they're not the same, but like they feel like they're interested in similar things.
Yes, for sure. I thought that. Yes, I agree. And so it's just that's always like an interesting, even though it wouldn't happen, it is like an interesting thought process. Or even like them all taking an existing short story of the other author and then rewriting it in their own style would be a very interesting like thought process. Anyway, we've gone far. You didn't like Warbreaker. I knew you weren't going to like Warbreaker. My heart is not broken because I knew, and so that's okay.
As I always say, expect the worst and hope for the best.
Exactly. If we move on to This Is How You Lose the Time War. I don't have it because it's really high on my shelf and I was lazy. There you go. This Is How You Lose the Time War. It's by two. It's Max Gladstone. And who's the other author?
Amal El-Mohtar.
Yeah, I don't think I've read any of their stuff on their own. I'm trying to think.
But your book is, you've put this on the top shelf. Is that like top shelf liquor where it's like, that's where the cream of the crop is? The top, the most valuable.
Now people who get very touchy about this stuff, maybe close your ears, but not in this room. I have bookshelves in our family room of standalones, and they are organized by color. And my blue books are on the top shelf. Now that really upsets some people when people do color sorting. I want to be clear, they're all standalones. So it's not as upsetting, and that's why it's in a main room. And these room is all, not by color.
Because you're saying that the normal person that comes to your house and might see those shelves wouldn't care, but a bookish person who sees the shelves behind you in a video would care.
Yes. Well, and I actually would never want to organize these. That would by color. It's very upsetting to me to have authors in different places. I understand it is upsetting, but in the main room, we just don't have enough books to fill the shelf. So it looks nicer with some color scheming, but people get upset about that. So anyway, it's on the top shelf. So this book, this is funny because I gave this book 4 stars. So it wasn't like a 5-star book like Paper Menagerie and Warbreaker for me, which were both 5 stars. This Is How You Lose the Time War was only a 4-star book, but I really loved how it used time travel as a backdrop. I had just never read a book where it just really did not explain time travel at all. It was just like, this is a thing and it doesn't matter in this book.
Forget time travel. It didn't explain anything.
It didn't explain anything. I, for some reason, found it very charming. I bought it purely on its cover and I had heard it had been very hyped. When I gave it to you, this is very important. I thought it was well liked because I liked it and hadn't heard anything bad. When I gave it to you, both a lot of people from your following and a lot of people from my following were like, I hated this book. And I was like, oh no. So he got it off. Zach just came in to get it off the top shelf. See how much nicer? This is why I wanted to give you, look how beautiful the heart.
And not only is this paperback, but it has a step back.
It's horrible. I know. So that, I'm so glad. Look, somebody in the comments liked it. Thank you. Because anyway, I was really surprised.
Well, if the past is anything to go by, what specifically in the past makes you think that I'm guaranteed to dislike it. Or it's just that I dislike a lot of stuff.
It was just, I just don't think you loved it. I don't think you hated it. I just think it was very average for you. Why I thought you might like it though is I know that you like interesting writing, and I think it has an interesting writing style. And I know you often like unique and weird things because you read Gaiman, and I felt like this was kind of like an offbeat thing. And so that's why I thought you might like it. Again, the only thing that I don't feel bad about is that you did tell me that you were planning on reading this anyway at some point in your life. Like you were interested in reading it, so I feel less bad. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, of the 4 you gave me, the 2 that I didn't own but would have like eventually picked up on my own were Paper Menagerie and This Is How You Lose the Time War.
Yeah, I didn't hate it. Just don't think Liana will like it. Alicia strongly disliked this book. This is what I'm telling you. Oh, good. Another person who loved it, but they're predicting meh or hated for you. For me, this is one that I don't really know how you feel about it at all. I'm just predicting like very average for you now that I know how other people feel. Liana. And the final answer is
I was very glad to not have to rate it after I had finished reading it. Because I still don't know what I would rate it.
Okay.
So we're just gonna leave it unrated for a little while longer, because in a completely different way from Warbreaker, like there are things that I like and things that I don't like about it, and I feel strongly about both. So I don't know what that averages out to, because like as the concept and the not just the concept of the story, but the concept of how they would go about executing the concept are innovative, and I've never seen anything like that before. So that's credit where it's due. And in theory, that's something that I would certainly at the very least be intrigued by. But like the execution was such a like purpley miasma of nonsense that I was like, what? What was any of that? And
you go.
I was gonna say, I saw a review after I finished it. I was like, what do people have to say? Like, I don't even know how I'm gonna explain this to anybody. So I looked at some reviews, and there was one that said, and I was like, yeah, I think I would agree with that because it's partly epistolary, but not completely. They said that they think they would have liked it better if it was entirely epistolary. And I think I would agree, because like the parts of it, like if it was only letters, then like the fact that a lot of it is left unexplained, you're like, well, you wouldn't put it in a letter because you already know about this. You wouldn't need to explain it. But then we got these like passages that are not in a letter, where it's like in theory, just like the narrator telling you stuff in a way that is more baffling than the letters. I was like, what is the point of this?
That's actually one of the reasons I did give it 4 stars and not 5. That is part of it. I vastly preferred the letter portion. Like I'd be like, when we ever got to a non-letter portion, I'd be like, when's the next letter? Like, because that was the narrative that I felt worked the best, probably for the reason you stated, which is when it's all in letter form, the need for explanation kind of goes away, because you are feeling like you are picturing something that's truly happening.
Well, then it would get the sense of like, okay, if I was to come across these documents and try to put together what occurred based on this correspondence, then you only have the correspondence to go off of. So the fact that things are unexplained, they're nebulous, they're wild, they're bizarre, but there's nobody like dumping exposition at you, because why would they? It's a letter. Then that would leave me feeling like the unexplainedness of it all is like, a feature that is unavoidable with this format. But because then you also have these passages where like you are just narrating and just like going out of your way to further not explain or further confuse me, I was like, but for why?
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like as a part, I think it just bothered me less. I definitely am a reader who will give a lot to a concept. Like I am definitely a reader who like can forgo, because like this is a lot of people's problem with the 3-body problem. You haven't read that, right? Yeah, see, I don't know how you would feel about that, because that is a book that's like really no plot, no characterization. It is all idea. And like some people can like, I read that with someone. They were like, I get it. Like I get why it's so famous, but like can't say I enjoyed the process of reading it. And so I think I do err on the side of being okay with a concept at the perhaps what's the word? It might bring down other parts of a narrative. So like I definitely get, because I mean I agree with that part of it for sure, that the weakest parts were the non-letters.
Well, I mean, partially it's that the weakest part is the non-letter, but it's also like the letters are weakened by having those other parts, because like then the confusingness of it becomes much more frustrating in its entirety because of that.
Thank you. At the expense. That is the very normal average word I was looking for. Yeah. So do you regret reading it?
I mean, it was, hyped and talked about and I wanted to read it. So like, I'm glad I finally did. But I mean, I have to say, like, when I finished it, like, I was like, well, that was a hell of a thing. I don't know what that was. It was wild.
That's fair. That's fair. And then finally, the book we'll probably spend the least amount of time on just because it's not fantasy is Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. So I read this maybe 8 years ago now. So it has been a while, in fairness. It's always nerve-wracking to give a book that you haven't read in a while. But I chose this just because Liene and I talk a lot about feminist issues, especially being female YouTubers who have to deal with a lot of sexism. And I just like Roxane Gay's writing style a lot. I think she's funny. I didn't agree with everything she wrote in the book, but I did enjoy the process of reading it, which is why I gave it to you. I think this was also a 4-star read for me when I did it. I didn't really do stars back then, but it was probably like a 4. Does anyone care to guess? I think this is the problem. I bet the least amount of the people watching have read this book. Oh, Eric wants to know if you listened to the audio or read This Is How You Lose the Time War.
I was going to say for that or Bad Feminist. I read it physically.
Yeah, I was going to say this is probably another hard book to listen to, is my guess.
Well, yeah, switching back and forth between letters and not letters would be probably a little disorienting. Like, that's not why I didn't listen to it. I mean, it was just really short, so I just...
Yeah, you might as well.
Sat down and read it. Like, I often, like, I have bigger books, like, I do audio so that I can, like, get through them.
Okay. People think you liked it. Radiant Reads thinks you liked it. She hasn't read it, though. Shauna has read it. I've also read Hunger, which is basically essays on... I think it's essays. Actually, Shauna, remind me. But that's purely body related
the title
stuff.
Would
yes,
title would
you
make
could
me
probably guess. It's funny because I preferred Bad Feminist, although Hunger is just a hard book to read with anyone with body issues. It's just like it was hard, but it was good.
I've seen the movie Hunger, which is about the hunger striker Bobby Sands.
I have personally not seen that. Most people think you liked it. How did you feel about the Bad Feminist?
I felt that calling them essays was a bit overselling it, that I don't think like that was setting it up for failure, because reading it I was like, I mean, these are some interesting musings, but to call them essays is overstating the case. To
me, it definitely reads like I guess this was one of the first essay collections I ever read, so I never questioned essay. I think people use the word essay to just mean a lot of short what's the word, like contained thoughts, but it definitely isn't. I would agree that it's much more flow than like a precise essay.
Well, I think I read after I finished it that like these had, maybe not all, but like a lot of what's in here had originally been blog posts, and I was like, that's what it reads like. I was like, if this was a collection, I mean, I don't, for marketing, I understand why you wouldn't call it a collection of blog posts. But like, I was like, that's more the vibe than essays. So like, I don't know, I just thought going into this, call it Bad Feminist, a collection of essays, that we were going to do some kind of like deep dives into like concepts.
So for you, it was like expectation is what changed it for you, because that's definitely not what that book is.
No. And I think, I mean, for that reason too, like I think a collection of like proper essays, like I would give a higher rating to, I mean, depending on how they were executed, because these are not that. So in the first place, I'm like let down because my expectation was essays and these are not quite that. But then also because that is not what they are just a lot more surface level on these topics. And a lot of it is like a couple had things that like I was like, okay, I hadn't quite heard it that way or heard that expressed that way or that brought up before. So like that's food for thought. But a lot of it was also, it came out a while ago. So like a lot of it, I feel like this discourse has been had and rehad and had better in the interim. So like maybe when it came out, it was like, wow. But like now it's kind of like when you like watch or like, well, I know you're reading Peter Pan. Like when you read Peter Pan, you're like, well, I know Peter Pan. Like I know this story, like whatever. But if you think about like when it came out, that like this didn't exist before. Like what a wild concept that J.M. Barrie just came up with. That like if you try to like read it like tabula rasa, like imagine a world that Peter Pan doesn't exist, and you're suddenly presented with the concept of Peter Pan. You're like, wow.
And then, I mean, I'm going to go back to Bad Feminist, but just talking about Peter Pan real quick. But yeah, there's things like that, like same with Alice in Wonderland, where the concepts have so pervaded our cultural being that it's hard to remember they came up with it. Things like Captain Hook and something like that, and The Lost Boys is so pervasive.
Like it reads like a cliche, even though he invented it.
And that's how I felt almost about Alice in Wonderland. Like Alice in Wonderland was great, and you read it and you're like, oh, he like literally popularized the term Wonderland. Like literally that was really first in this book, and it's wild. What I was gonna say,
the first time I saw the movie The Sixth Sense, like it was like many, many years after it had come out. And when Haley Joel Osment said, "I see dead people," it didn't sound like a line to me. Like I was like, oh, this is the part where he says, "I see dead people."
and no longer you just say that now. It's just a cultural thing that people say.
Yeah.
I will say when you like, because you told me a little bit, that's how you felt about Bad Feminist. And when you said that, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because I read it 8 years ago, which is a long time for me in my thought process about topics in this book, almost a decade.
Yeah, I think if I'd read this 8 years ago, I would have been more like, wow.
And that was, I was like, maybe I should have reread it before I gave it to you, because now you said that. I was like, oh, I can see how
better.
yeah, well, yeah. And I that was a really interesting thing for me to hear. Like I am kind of curious to go back and read it now. Maybe my opinion will have changed a lot on it because it's been a decade, which is a huge amount of time for things like that. And
well, also with, I mean, the unfortunately, like it's with like fiction, like it's still like a story, you know, so that you can enjoy. Whereas like with like even like, so I read last year The Third Chimpanzee, which is like written by an anthropologist, and like it's still a very interesting read, but like, you know, buyer beware, a lot of the like facts and data that he was using, like he wasn't wrong like at the time, but we have since gathered new data, and like some of those figures have changed. So when you read it, like it's not like, oh, but it's still a classic. Like, no, it's wrong now. So
yeah,
like and this isn't, you know, this thing with like data, but it's still like, you know, the discourse on these topics, like as the years go by, they become more complex. And like it's kind of when I interviewed Abercrombie, and I wasn't asking him to like defend his representation or lack of representation of female characters. I just was curious why RD was not a POV, because she's in it a lot, and like you almost forget that she's not a POV, but she's not.
I wondered about that, because I keep telling people, I'm like, I can't remember if RD's a POV or not, because I just feel like we got a lot of her, but I can't remember.
She's not. And like I was like, I guess I'm giving you more credit than you deserve. He was like, yes, I do, because like, or yes, you are, because like I thought there might be a narrative reason that he's like, you know, it'll ruin something if you like have access to her thoughts, or that I want to keep that from the reader or something like that. He's like, nope, it just didn't occur to me to make her a POV. And he was saying how like when he was writing the books that he was like, I thought, you know, I was like, you know, blowing the door off of the whole concept of like portraying women, because like she's drunk and she's like loud mouthed and she's not polite and like she's so coarse, and like, wow, I've like written this like completely unique female character. So he was like making fun of himself for that, but at the same time, like,
I mean, did love Artie. She's my favorite female character of the original trilogy, because I think he does do a very good job of making her.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the same thing of like when you're the earlier you are in like something like that, it can be for its time groundbreaking, and yet, you know, the needle moves with time.
Yeah. And what I was going to also say about it. It reminded me of our conversation we briefly had about the Calculating Stars, even though I know you haven't read it, where at some point you read something at a certain time in your life and you just expect something deeper, which is how I felt about that book. And I'm wondering if you felt probably similarly about this, which is just like, this was fine, but I thought going into it, it was going to be deeper than it was.
Yeah, I mean, I guess deeper is a fine word. Like, I guess to me more, I just expected something more, I don't know, academic.
That makes
more
sense.
like analyzing these issues, not like I'm venting about some personal grievances and some like musings that I've had, and like, you know, which is, it's still interesting and entertaining, but like that's a very different project from like analyzing like the female in today's society from an academic perspective.
Well, then you should read. I should have given you this. I didn't, just because it's kind of long. Invisible Women. Data
What is
bias.
the retelling of Invisible Man?
Data bias in a world built for men. It is a nonfiction, which is why I didn't get it.
So is this? Are you telling me that this is fiction?
That is nonfiction, but it's a collection of essays, which feels different. So I'm like, that's straight up nonfiction. But then you should read Invisible Women, because I did just read that last year, and it was 5 stars. And that is purely data about how sexism is built into our systems, which I actually think you would like a lot. I made Kyle read it, and he really liked it. Well, he said it infuriated him. It will infuriate you, but it infuriates you for the right reasons, because it's trying to make you angry.
I mean, that's like the same as reading Ken Liu stories where like you're upset and angry, but like you should be upset and angry.
Yes. You can guess by his name, Liana, that technically he probably would bully you. And not
maybe he's
me.
bullying you for giving me a Sanderson book, which is
maybe no. Except Elijah's super cool. He actually does bully me constantly, so he'd probably be on your side, even though he runs a Sanderson fan account on Instagram. Okay, so that is the non-spoiler part. I'm sure we won't like talk spoilers too long, but are there books that you feel like you want to dive in to some spoilers? And if so,
are there books that people want me to dive into spoilers?
You guys want to hear some Warbreaker spoilers, is what she means.
Oh, I thought Bad Feminist, but okay.
You thought for sure, right? Radium Girls is excellent. That was one of my top books, I think 2019, 2020, whenever I read it. Radium Girls, just as a... Everyone, tell us which comics you want to hear about. Okay, Warbreaker. But let me say Radium Girls real quick.
Surprise!
The girls who painted the glow-in-the-dark stuff on the watch dials, and they used radium, and they didn't know it was bad for you, and how they all died these horrible deaths, and still the companies would not say that it was their fault. It is a horribly depressing read. Very interesting, because at the end, you kind of worry that we haven't gone very far from that in the years and corporations. But anyway, no one wants to hear about that. Everyone wants to hear about Warbreaker.
It's an interesting segue into Warbreaker, since there's some like feministing things in Warbreaker.
Eric wants to know about what you thought about the color magic system in Warbreaker. I know you have some stuff about... Oh, and they just want us to hear about Jade City, which we can do at the end. Why not? We're reading Jade War together right now.
Yeah.
So,
because you know, most of the time, like it is actually more unusual that we disagree about a book than
it is. Yeah. It's really, I feel like Sanderson is pretty much the last standing thing we really disagree on. We have
and Sword of Truth and Wheel of Time.
Sword of Truth and Wheel of Time, but we both have claimed that we will never die on that hill.
Yeah, and we have lots of nostalgia goggles. Yes,
we both have that. So I feel like that's really the last one that we really...
But I guess like we were talking before the live, and I was like, there is no book or author that I would consider naming my channel after that you hate.
Right. Unlike me.
So I'm sorry.
Oh, we won't actually talk about Jade City, Elijah. We're going to talk about Warbreaker first, and why she didn't like it, and why
we can talk about Jade City, but like later.
We'll talk about later. Okay, go, Liana. I guess I don't know. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with your biggest grievance about the ending?
Well, or we can start with the color magic system, since that's what Eric was asking about.
Color magic.
Let's like ease into criticizing Warbreaker.
Color magic. Sorry, I was just like decided to go for your first, like your biggest one.
I'm so surprised that you would want to choose violence again.
Yeah, you know. I mean, it's really violence against myself at this point.
I know. I think it's quite masochistic.
Yeah. I'm just trying to show like I'm not like other girls and then I can handle it. You know?
I mean, you are a good sport about it. But then again, I feel like it would be extra
It'd be really
awful
weird. Yeah, it'd be
if
weird to
you
give
were
you a book.
upset.
It'd be weird to give you a book and then be upset about it. Like I prepared. So let's start with the color magic system. Now, I personally, when I first read Warbreaker, thought it was extremely confusing. So I don't know if you felt that way, but I was very confused about it the first time I read it.
Confused, yes, but not in the way that you mean. I was like confused by like the choices made about it. Like I don't know, like narratively. I was like, I don't understand why you wrote it like this.
What about it?
So okay, so like to say it's a color-based magic system, like I really kind of like undersells it. Like colors are part of it, but like that's not, colors are more like a symptom than like, and I think that too, like when people say it's a color-based magic system, I'm like, but it's not though. Like colors are like a visual like way to see that magic has happened. You know what I mean? Because it's, when I think a color-based magic system, I think, I don't know, like isn't
it's a breath magic system.
Yeah.
It's and I'm glad you said that because I do always get annoyed. So like, well, color systems, that's why it's boring. There's so many color magic. I'm like, but it's really not color magic though. It's like
I haven't read it, but I'm pretty sure the Lightbringer series has like
yes,
a prism with like multiple
this.
colors, and like that is a color-based magic system.
Yes, it's all sight. Like you actually can make, it's about the color spectrum and what you can and can't see. So yeah, that is what it gets compared to a lot, but I find them to be extremely different.
So like, so when people say that, how do I feel about the color-based magic system? I think that if you're going to ask me what I think of the magic system, I think that the stupidest part of the magic system is the colors, because it's not a color-based magic system. Colors are like incidental to it, and they are the stupidest part of it. So
then what did you feel about the breaths then?
So the breaths like halfway make sense to me, and I don't mean like, again, I don't mean like I don't understand.
You got it. Okay, let's be clear. Leanna understood Warbreaker. She got it.
Yes, I don't need to read it smarter. But I don't, like, as conceptually, like it does not work for me that you can animate inanimate objects with breaths. Like that you can animate, that you can like get life force and you can give life force. So you can like level up by just getting more life force, which, because that's what breaths are basically. That you can like get aliver, like that makes sense to me, and that you can get less alive, and then the dead body, which once had life force, could be reanimated if you give it now some life force. Like, so like when they use it to animate the dead, like totally works for me. But animating a shoe with like a human life force does not make sense to me. Again, not in like a, he wrote it confusingly. Just like, I'm like, I don't, why? Why would that be a thing? How does that work with the rest of this? And then if you tell a shoe to do something, that's where I'm like, is this like Beauty and the Beast? And they're like, are they moving? And if not, then what can an inanimate object do, even if it has a modicum of sentience?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I feel like it's similar to how you felt about state change in the Paper Menagerie, because you kept being like, and this isn't a spoiler for a state change. In state change,
yeah, when you were laughing about that, I was like, wait till she hears what I think about.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because in state change, every person is born with a physical manifestation of their soul. So our main character, for example, was born with an ice cube, and that's the physical manifestation. And one thing you had a problem with is people had manifestations that were man-made objects. Like someone has a cigarette pack, someone has, I think, a coffee tin, I think was one of them, things like that. Or a salt shaker, I don't know, all sorts of things like that. And that really bothered you, and it just didn't even cross my mind. And the same with this idea of, well, I'm fine with a human life force animating another dead human, but not an object. I find that for me, magic is magic, and I'm okay to be on board as long as it makes sense within the realm it is, if that makes sense. So like in state change, people can have objects that are man-made. I'll accept it if that's what you tell me. So I wonder if that is something about the magic that I'm just predisposed to not care as much about. Just like based on Liu's and this one, like I will just be okay accepting if this is how it is, as long as it's used consistently, I'm okay.
But see, that's where also like I didn't feel like it was that consistent, especially for like an author that is known for like hard, consistent, strict magic systems. Because like when we're talking about animating objects, like it was very nebulous when it was like, okay, so then you can give it commands, but you have to like make them really, really simple. But like sometimes they can be kind of complicated, but like your intent has to be strong with it. And it was just like all over the place. And I was like, what are the rules? Like, it seems like you keep backtracking on your own rules and being like, oh, okay, except for here, though, like, we can totally actually do the thing that I low-key said we couldn't do before because we're good enough to do that now. I said it wasn't a thing, but it's a thing now. So I was like, okay, a thing I already think is kind of dumb and then isn't consistent.
Yeah. I mean, I felt it was, so like I can't comment on it. Like I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying like I didn't feel that way about it.
And then like I genuinely don't understand what benefit there is to imbuing a sword with life force. Like why? Like what do you get out of a sword having an opinion about who he's killing?
They thought they would be clever and they thought that they could make something to destroy evil, right? They thought that they could create this nebulous thing and put it in a concept and that they'd always be righteous because they had a sword that only could destroy evil, and instead it became this horrible thing. So like for me, that was like people just trying to do stuff they didn't understand and trying to do things and screwing it up, because that ultimately is always what happens. Okay, here's Elijah.
I guess if it wasn't life force, like if it wasn't like sentience kind of, if it was like if the magic was different, I don't get why having your sword have opinions about what it's killing helps you.
Well, I don't think they thought it was going to, though. That's the thing.
But then what did they think it would do?
Like, I don't think they thought it was going to be sentient in the way that it was. I think that they thought it would be a sword that if they commanded it to go kill evil, like their little animated stuff that they used to go do, that it could understand what that concept was and destroy.
But like, again, is it like a Lumiere sword where like it like walks itself around and jumps up and stabs something? So like I don't understand how animating it helps.
Yeah, and this is the hard part, because I agree and disagree with what Elijah's saying, because I feel like I know as we go deeper into the Cosmere, it's going to be harder to understand things without knowing it. But Warbreaker is a standalone, and I think you can and should be able to understand it without understanding anything else about the Cosmere. And I do agree with Pete. Like, this is the magic system. Why a lot of people don't like Warbreaker is, I think, actually because of the magic system. So I don't think you're alone in that. Like, obviously, Sanderson fans would come after you because they couldn't ever agree with you, because obviously not. This is like what
I
happens,
am the evil that Nightblood was created to kill.
Correct. But I do think, like Pete is saying, it is a very nebulous one. And certainly on my first read, I was confused by it. Like you said, you got it. I don't think it took me a while because of those same things you're saying. I just came to love the other stuff. But yeah, Nightblood, I think they were trying to create something that would keep them honest and like only kill evil things. And instead they created this really bloodthirsty, weird, sentient sword that doesn't have any concept of time or really evil. It actually just likes to destroy, period. And most people who like Warbreaker do love Nightblood. I am one of them who does love Nightblood. I think it was an interesting concept, and I really loved Vasher and Vivenna having to deal with her doing all these terrible things, but not at heart meaning to do them. Like, I always felt like that was why I liked Vivenna in the end a lot. Well, because Vivenna is the worst. I hate her so much in the beginning. And then she becomes homeless for a week. And then I'm like, oh, I kind of feel sorry for you now. And the way that she has to like deal with all of her past beliefs, I think is very intriguing. That's probably one of the reasons I like Warbreaker a lot. So I don't know, how did you feel about Vivenna? Because you said you hated her and you liked her.
Was it like how you just described, like who she is in the situation she's placed in, like on the surface, like that thing, that type of thing? Yeah, like I love that kind of thing. I just felt like how it was in this book was, I guess it was like what Bad Feminist is to essays, where it just felt like a very watered down, basic, like surface level version of that.
And Lightsong, who I think is the person you feel the most conflicted about.
Lightsong wasn't boring, is the best thing that I can say for Lightsong. Lightsong's the worst.
But you have to go more than that. This is what the people are here for, Liana. I don't know what to tell you.
Do you like Lightsong?
I mean, I like the book. So I guess, yes, I like Lightsong. In the original read through, it's been a while since I read it for the first time. And it's really hard because when you reread books several times, your feelings start changing based on what you know. So that's really, I don't know if that makes sense. So it's like kind of hard for me to remember, like, how did I feel about him the first time? His chapters were the slowest for me. I remember thinking the first time I read it. And I struggled. I mean, I like Lightsong. Yes, I like Lightsong. I struggled with his relationship with Blushweaver a lot. The first time I struggled with the character of Blushweaver a lot. When I first read the book. But I love Lightsong's arc. Like, I love the idea of someone who is worshipped as a god, who does not believe he should be a god. And then the reveal about his person being his brother, I always just loved that part so much. And knowing that it would happen before it did, when he gives up his breath to save God, essentially. I mean, they're God King. He's not God. They're God King. That arc, I just love it. I love that arc. It's one of the reasons I like Warbreaker. But yes, Lightsong sometimes, and his interactions with others, I didn't necessarily like, especially Blushweaver.
So, like, Lightsong, this is why we're, like, again, when I was comparing it to Way of Kings, like, Lightsong has personality, and he has more personality than pretty much everybody else. So, like, when I was reading the book, I was like, okay, you guys are, like, a bunch of, like, archetypal
And I also
characters.
liked him way more on a reread. Like, I started loving him on a reread, so I just think that's interesting. Sorry, continue.
I was just saying, so, like, I so often hated, like, things that he said or how he behaved or, like, what he was doing in the plot. But, like, it's, again, the lovely love me, hate me, but don't ignore me. Like, I was having an actual reaction to him all of the time, as opposed to, like, Vivenna or Siri. And, like, characters in Way of Kings where I'm just like, I don't feel anything about you as a person, and the stuff going on around you is aggravating me. So, like, I feel nothing about this in, like, a investment kind of way. I don't know. Whereas, like, Lightsong, I was like, I don't quite, think of you as, like, a human person. And I don't mean because he's magical. I mean, like, when you start thinking of characters as, like, people, you're like, what would they do? What would they say? So I'm not, like, fully there with Lightsong, but, like, more with him than anyone else, where I was like, you have a personality, and I often hate that personality, but you have one, and you're much more interesting to me than everyone else for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Are you ready now for the thing that you really didn't like about Warbreaker?
Well, while we're still on Lightsong, I cannot forgive that he, about Blushweaver, said that she looked so much better when she respected herself enough to cover herself up. And that was not questioned in text. That was not, like, circled back to. It was not presented as, like, he's an ass for, like, saying something like that. It was just a thing he said. And I was like, what?
Yeah, I would like to hear people in the comment section's thoughts on that part. Because I always read it as that he was in the wrong because Blushweaver liked who she was. That was the whole point of her character. But I'd be curious if other people read it as, like, it's never challenged, so it's meant to be agreed upon. I'd be very interested to hear other people's thoughts about that section. But while we wait for that, are you ready?
That's crickets. I was like, we all like Lightsong.
Have you chickened out? You don't have to talk about it.
No, I haven't chickened. I just feel like that is, like, both that's the end, like, chronologically, like, the ending, and it is also, like, the biggest thing. So, like,
something
else
we're working our way up spoiler wise.
Well, again, and I talked to you about this, where the fact that Siri, her title is Vessel, and, like, I don't expect that she would go around, like we've talked about, anachronistic, like, feminism and, like, wildly unrealistic portrayals of people just, like, yelling about feminism where you really wouldn't. So like I don't expect her to walk around telling people like, how dare you call me that, I'm a human, blah. Like I wouldn't want that. But like she's a POV character, so we do have access to her thoughts, and she doesn't like, that doesn't bother her. That she's called vessel. You don't feel any kind of way about that?
Yeah. Sanderson is never really someone who does a lot of thoughts in that way. If you read any books, like he doesn't necessarily. So I guess it doesn't surprise me. It's more focused, I think, on her fear of the situation and not knowing what to do. But yeah, like I'll admit, like I don't really remember feeling anything about that. Like, so I can't remember enough of those situations to know how to feel about that.
Well, and again, and this is where like when you're talking about like execution and like why this doesn't often work for me, like there's the way I tend to express it, and I think I'm usually thinking of magic, but it's actually true kind of like all the time and everything, is that he'll have an idea for like a concept he wants to have, a situation he wants to have, like a type of magic that he wants to have, but then like there's a ripple effect. Like that decision to have that thing, that situation, that magic, it affects so many more things than the scene that you wanted to have with that thing. So like, okay, this is the situation with these countries, and this is her title, and that's her purpose in being there, and the dad is the worst dad in the world and made the decision to send her there. But like, you haven't also then talked about all the ways that this is going to make them feel, and all the ways it's going to make them like how they're experiencing all these things, how like the combination of that situation would affect how you would react to it. Like it feels very like in a vacuum. And I'm like, these things like affect each other in a more holistic way, that you're like keeping them in their little boxes of like, this is where this happens, this is how this is affected, as like a one-to-one, but it's not like that. Like life's way messier than that. Because like she's also not ever pissed at her dad for sending her, and I'm like, how is she not pissed at her dad for sending her? How is she not pissed at being called vessel? And if she's fine with both of those things,
I think she's sad about her dad sending her. That's what I get. It's like not being pissed, it's depressed. Like, and I think that could be a valid response. I don't always know that anger is going to be the first response to a parent who you have now always suspected likes your siblings more, and now full proof that you have been the lesser loved sibling. It may be sad more than anger.
But she's like, then she's not sad enough. Like the utter betrayal that is, that I feel like she needs to be like affected more, whatever that looks like, either in denial about it and actively presented as in denial, or like really, really upset about it, or really mad about it, or whatever. But she would feel some kind of way about it. And I feel like it's like, okay, like kind of sad about it, but moving on to the next plot thing we need to have happen.
Do you have an opinion on Parlin's silly hat?
I don't remember Parlin's silly hat.
I'm going to be honest, I've read this book like 3 times and I don't remember Parlin's silly hat. So there you go, Elijah. Yeah, okay. So that's Siri. I mean, that's most of the main characters. Vivenna. I tend towards YA than adult high fantasy. I think the human experience can be a lot in high fantasy. I think it just depends what you're looking for. Because see, I stopped reading YA for the same reason, because I felt like I was getting less of the human experience that I was experiencing. So I think it just depends a lot on what experience you are looking to have or to see. I think is a lot. It's a lot about viewpoint. Kind of like what Jim and I talked on our last live about what you're seeking through grimdark or non-grimdark is a lot of a reflection of what you see in the world, I think. Yeah, and she is a very optimistic character at heart, which I think is one of the interesting things. Anyway, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm not going to argue with you. Like, I'm going to let you feel that way. You know what I mean? So I'm not just going to be like, I don't know what to say. I'm not going to be like, you're wrong, but I'm also not going to be like, you're right, because I love the book. You know what I mean? So
well, like when we were talking about like Ken Liu's stories and how like, how do you pick which is like the best one? And I was like, well, the one that like makes you cry is like the one that you're like, well, I felt the most feelings for that. So that one, I guess. And so like, this is where like comparing it to Way of Kings, I'm like, I felt aggravated and angry and frustrated, and like I felt a lot more things, like not necessarily positive things, but it like engaged me because I was like thinking about the situation. I was like, well, that's messed up. Why aren't you angry about this? I'm angry about this. Why aren't you upset about this? I'm upset about this. Like, whereas reading Way of Kings, I was just like a newborn baby, like trying to stay awake. So like, I was like, you've inspired like reaction in me. So I like it better, but like, I'm really pissed at you.
Look at that. Apparently, Parlin is a forgettable, useless character and doesn't have much of a personality, which is hilarious since I've read this book 3 times and still don't know who Parlin is. And I consider myself someone who knows a lot about Sanderson. So there you go. We weren't supposed to remember him. Yeah. Anyway. I'm trying to think. Anyone else?
Before with the big guns.
For the big guns.
So before I started reading it, and I had no context because I hadn't read it, so I had no idea what they were talking about. But like a couple of my patrons said, if she hates this book, it will be because of the jumping on the bed scene. And I got to that part and I was like, I actually like this part. This is one of the parts that feels like the most believable to me as like what she's like doing and how she's experiencing this and how she's like trying to make it work. So like that worked for me.
You know, Sanderson always says that is his most explicit scene in any book he's written.
Well, when that scene started, I was like, are we? What? I was not expecting this.
Yeah, I found that scene funny. It was surprising to me when I read it, though, because it was very explicit. And for the time period I was reading, pretty much a very explicit thing. Like, you guys have forced me to read Abercrombie now, and now I'll never recover from those scenes. But
that's a very special brand of that type of scene. No one writes them like Abercrombie does.
Okay, I actually think I remember who this is now. Yeah, okay. Sort of. Thanks, Elijah. The biggest thing you had a problem with was who the bad guys were in the end.
I surely did. It's the most unforgivable part of this whole book.
Yeah, I think that's probably your biggest problem with the book, correct?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
because the other stuff is like, you know, why would you write it like that? Or like, I don't know why you didn't do that, or you did do that, or that doesn't work for me. But this, I'm like, unacceptable.
So what was it? Explain it for the people left.
So this is the first book I read, so the names of things you'll have to remind me. But so the situation, right, is that the princesses Anna and Elsa have now like gone to the land of the colors. One of them to wed the God King, and the other one who was supposed to wed the God King and supposedly learned about all these people extensively shows up and knows nothing about these people. Where again, I was like, what happened to that education that you supposedly had?
Well, so I always think that's because of the distrust and dislike their homeland has for them, that their education is so colored by that.
Colored. I see what you did there.
I did there. I've always assumed that was purposeful. That's how I read it. Like, and then she goes there and like knows nothing, and she's really some like dumb, uneducated.
Well, so this is interesting, because I feel like a lot. When I just talked to you about Warbreaker before now, like when I first read it, because you were like, okay, you have to tell me.
Yeah. I wasn't going to wait that long. I was going to wait a month to know what you thought about it.
Which, I mean, also, like, I think having talked about it, like, immediately after reading it, you know, like, solidifies, like, in your memory more, like, what happened. But, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, but it's interesting to me that not everything, but a lot of things that I pointed out as, like, something that I did not like, because I interpreted that it was not presented as being questioned. It wasn't presented as being challenged. It wasn't presented as something where like we evolved on the issue. And like I would tell you a thing like Blushweaver or like Siri, and you were like, well, I interpreted it as you are meant to think that that's bad. And it's interesting to me that like it sounds to me like you would agree with me. It's just that you don't think that the book is condoning it, and I do.
Yes, that was super interesting. Yeah. That we had a different experience reading that, because it's true. The things you bring up, I agree with, right? I wouldn't want someone to be saying those things, but I read it as a flaw in the character, whereas you feel like it wasn't challenged enough.
Which is like, I think saying challenged is not exactly how I feel, because I don't necessarily require books to like come out and say, this thing that just happened, that is wrong. Like, okay, no, you can have to be more. But that's just where like I think that's why it, other than the fact that I'm a character-driven reader, that's why it's so crucial to me to have much more of those character introspective moments, because that's when I'm going to find out, okay, how do you feel about this? Do you think that that was fine? Do you not think that that was fine? Like, I don't have anything to get that kind of a vibe, or to like be able to like, because like, okay, so like the example we always use is Giselle in First Law. You read Giselle, at no point any like sane person would think that Joe Abercrombie thinks that what Giselle is thinking and saying is fine. And it's not because he's had a moment
and
where
I
he's
disagree
gone like,
with you.
I'm the baddie.
There is someone out there
Well, sure.
who reads Giselle and thinks that he is an okay dude.
And they leave him a 1-star review, yes. But like, it's
No,
not
I mean,
like,
I bet there's someone out who thinks Giselle is a decent dude.
oh
that
well,
he's okay.
that also is, yeah. Those, I bet they like Norwegian wood too.
Well, it's definitely a circle for that Venn diagram.
But like,
Anyway.
it's sort of like being challenged in the text isn't necessarily how that needs to happen to like point out that this
I
is
meant
bad.
challenge in the way you just described, in terms of there's a clear, you get, if you're reading correctly, you get a clear sense, like Giselle, that this is not someone we should view as a reliable narrator and think that everything he says is what we should believe. So yeah, that's what I meant by challenge. Because I agree. No, we don't need it to be spelled out. I don't.
Yeah, and we don't need the character to like realize that they were the baddie.
Right.
So like that's what's missing for me. So like, okay, you and like
wait,
that.
What are we
I
so
told
right
you
about?
that,
It says, "Yikes, you're so right." What are we so right about?
maybe about the person who thinks Giselle is a great dude.
Oh, I don't know. Someone who relates to Giselle is a red flag. Hard yes.
But so like you have no context for this, but like when I first told you about how I felt about Lightsong, I was like, okay, like he reminds me, which sounds like the highest praise in the world, of Orso from the Age of Madness trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. But also, like Orso is like this done right. And whereas like, because when Orso is written by Joe Abercrombie, when he thinks and says things about, because they're both kind of vapid, they're both kind of like living luxurious lifestyles, not really responsible for anything, not interested in being responsible for anything. But it's just like with Giselle. So like you can imagine, since you haven't read it yet, that it's the similar situation where you read about this character from this character's perspective, and you're not like, is this supposed to be admirable or is this not fine? Is it like, so like he'll say, that's not a word, crude things. Crass and crude I put together to crad.
Crap.
So like he'll say crude things and do crude things, but like I don't know, the way that Lightsong is presented both as like utterly lacking in like responsibility and therefore like that wouldn't be virtuous, and yet like his arc is such a one of like of virtue and being a hero that I'm like, okay, you showed me him saying all and doing all these things, and then he's like a wonderful self-sacrificing hero. So like, are you saying that was fine? Like that he's fine?
I think it's both. I think the point is like, especially when you find out about Lightsong's, what he actually did, which was both good, but like, heroic. It was obviously a heroic act that made him die the first time, but also he wasn't really living a life that was heroic at all. And I think that's what's interesting, is that in his, oh my gosh, why can't I think of the word? Returned form, he is similar, where he is capable of heroic acts, but himself is not necessarily somebody that is acting heroic on a daily basis. So that I think is a very interesting parallel in those about that character. But yeah, and I knew Elijah was going to talk about crabs.
But he's like sort of presented as like, just a little bit smarter and able to suss out the situation than everyone else, because even though he seems kind of lackadaisical, he's actually like kind of figured stuff out better than anyone else did. And he's got Blush Weaver to help him kind of like actually what's going on.
Yeah, he's like a detective, he's trying to be all a detective, but then he actually wasn't in his last life. Yeah, I don't know. It always felt like that scene where he's like, no, his brother's like, you weren't a detective. Like, you weren't any of this. You just think you are. And like that to me was in some ways a condemnation of the way Lightsong has been acting. That scene, but
but this is where like
yeah.
if you showed me more, so like you're showing me a dichotomy in personality, but then like it's just that though. And like there are so many layers and layers and layers around all of those things that like would make this feel
but also
whole.
like, and I told you this when we were Instagramming, I was like, yeah, but you can't compare the Sanderson you're reading to Joe Abercrombie, who's like your one and only true of all things.
But it's not my fault Lightsong reminded me of Orso. I was like, you know who this reminds me of?
And then I was like, well, you know who wrote it first? You know when this was published? Liene. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we know. You heard it here, folks. Abercrombie is plagiarizing Sanderson.
Heard it here first. That is the opinion I am dying on. That will be my new channel now. According to Reddit, you are not allowed to like Sanderson and Abercrombie together, so I already am a non-existent.
You're lying about one of them.
I'm lying about it. Yeah, lying about it. Anyway, your problem with the ending is you felt like.
I was trying to explain the situation.
You were trying to explain it, but I think it's easier if you don't use names, because I'm going to be honest, I confuse the names all the time too, and I've read this 3 times. Like you were just saying, the people who had been conquered are portrayed as the bad people for trying to throw off their initial oppressors.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So, which was really interesting because, let's see, I'm trying to think the last time I read this. So I read it 3 times, but I think the last time I read it was a few years ago. So when you said that, I was like, wait, is that really what it is? So I was like going on the wiki and I was like, oh, it is though. So like, I don't know how I feel about that, because it is, right? That group of people were, why can't I think of the word? Colonization. Yeah.
Either colonized or like their country was occupied.
Yeah, they were occupied and taken over. And then now these 2 countries are fighting. But really, they're the people, who were originally there. And it was theirs. And it's been a long time. Like, it's been a very long time. But so you were saying, like, it left a bad taste in your mouth that our bad guys were really just trying to pit them against each other so that they could have their original lands. And
yeah, I mean, essentially, they're freedom fighters.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting view of it, and yeah, it's interesting. It's not something I could really, even at the time, I was like, I don't really know what to say about it, because you're so, and this is one, I'll put it this way. You are so in Siri's head. Like, she's really the main character, right? I mean, you have Lightsong and you have Vivenna, but Siri's really our main character. So, of course, anything that threatens her is going to be automatically what the reader sides with in general, like in a general reading. So I think you could make the argument, well, we're just siding with Siri because she's the main character and you're not supposed to, but I personally believe that is not the case in this book. I do not think that was the intention in any way. So I'm not making that argument. So then it's like, it becomes interesting. Like, should we be siding with that? And so,
and like, it's not like I'm pissed that like, oh, they should have realized that like they were the oppressors this whole time. Like, because Siri is quite naive and quite young. And even Vivenna in her own way is quite naive and sheltered. So like, if the realization is the same realization that, oh, this is what's been going on, if like the reaction to that isn't just like, surprise, what a twist, is like, oh, are we the baddies? This is complicated, because like they're trying to start a war, which is like also not great. Like, we would like to prevent that, but also they have good reason, and this is a lot more complicated than just stopping a war.
So what's interesting, everyone on this chat right now, if you haven't read Stormlight Archive, close your ears. Liena's never going to read it, so I'm allowed to talk to her about it. Close your ears. Everyone, you have a spoiler warning. This is going to be a huge spoiler for Stormlight Archive. Oathbringer. Okay. What's really interesting is he is trying to redo this in the Stormlight Archive. You find out that the Voidbringers are actually our main characters. They were the ones who came and colonized Roshar. And
what's an example of a Voidbringer? I don't remember.
Voidbringers, they think, is like the people who were they're like the Parshendi are the void bringers. They think they're going to bring on things. What they found out was that they were the ones who actually came from a different planet and colonized Roshar, and they were the ones that were the void bringers to the Parshendi. So they realized that it was themselves who were them. And what's really interesting is people are very nervous about this. Very nervous about this plot point because for reasons you brought up, like how is that going to shake out? Because for our main characters, a lot of these Parshendi are the bad guys right now. So how are we going to rectify what we feel up our characters and now knowing that they were actually the colonizers? So what I think is interesting is like, I do think he is trying to explore that in a more nuanced way now, but we don't know yet. So my point being, what's interesting is like, I didn't catch that on the first read through. And I think it's just clumsy. Like, I think that's what it is. Like, I never noticed. And I don't think now that I like Warbreaker so much, it's going to affect my liking of it. But it was definitely the criticism you said that I was like, oh, like when I read it, I didn't realize that, but that is what it is. So, yeah, that's really,
I mean, the best thing I can say for it is that like with a lot of things.
Yeah, this is me, Elijah. I'm like, I'm just gonna apologize for it. I'm like, I'm not gonna stop liking Warbreaker, but you're not wrong either. So
like I don't think that he wrote a story in which he was like, I'm gonna demonize the natives. Like I don't think that.
Well, that's
but
what I think he literally just didn't think about it. I literally
which is why like
it was thought about.
Which I think, I mean, I said like, because I filmed a review for, my Sanderson tier patrons.
Yeah. And me, but I said I wasn't going to watch it. I said I loved you, but not enough to watch you trashing on it for 20 minutes.
Which, understandable. But like, I think basically like towards the end of that, when I was like, so how do I feel about it? I was like, I just feel real icky about this. Like, if I felt that he was, it was, I don't know, a veiled way to like brainwash people to thinking that the natives are bad and this is an allegory for like suppressing native, like I don't think that, and I don't think that there's an argument to be made for him purposely doing that, but like that egregious level of thoughtlessness is icky.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Elijah, you just have to tell me what character you're talking about. Okay, message me, Elijah. I don't know.
Also, I don't know how you're going to tell people that spoilers have ended, but
people
can listen again.
Yeah, you can listen. I don't know. I think you just assumed. Spoilers are over here. I'll post a comment. By the way, spoilers are over now for Stormlight. Okay, Elijah's going to be angry about that. Yeah, and I actually think a lot of this is really, I don't want to get into this too much, so people in the chat. We had a very long back and forth conversation about Harry Potter and these things recently about, things that aren't intentional can get more of a pass, but whether they're intentional or not does have an effect on the story and how it's perceived. And so I think that's like a fair criticism. I really don't think it was purposeful. I mean, that doesn't affect things. It makes me feel better about it at least. You know what I mean?
I mean, when it's like shades of gray, like that's a lighter shade.
Yes. But yeah, it's very interesting. And I even told you, like, I'm going to reread Warbreaker, obviously, in my life again. I think actually maybe this year. What? I don't think Radiant Reads is on here anymore because she's East Coast. But we're probably going to read it together again. And I'm just curious now to reread it with that in mind. Again, I'm too close to the book now for it to matter to me in the grand scope of things, but it is a very interesting thing that I just never considered before because I was so in Siri's viewpoint of, well, we don't want to start this war, and not in the wider scope of what it really means if that was a real world.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's an interesting, it's interesting. And I would love to know people who are also Sanderson fans and love Warbreaker like I did or meh about it, if anyone else noticed that, because it's a discussion I haven't heard, which surprises me. It just like surprises me that I haven't heard it brought up before, especially because we've been having this conversation a lot in terms of Stormlight Archive. You would think people would bring up Warbreaker as well. And maybe because it's the less loved of Sanderson's that it just doesn't.
Well, what do you expect from Warbreaker?
Yeah, so I'd be very curious about that, but
it sort of felt like the only consideration was like, what a twist! It was actually the third people, as opposed to like, okay, but that means that those are the indigenous people.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like that's not just a twist.
Yeah, it's just very interesting. Yeah, and I don't
And like I couldn't help like, okay, so like, you know, you always bring your personal experiences, life, who you are to everything you read. And I mean, I am 100% of Latvian descent. It was my first language, so I grew up in the Latvian diaspora, learning all about Latvian history and Latvian cultural heritage. And Latvia, for people who don't know, because most people don't know, it's a very, very tiny country, is one of the Baltic countries and was occupied like on a rotating basis by Germany and Russia. And like that having in quite recent history, like Latvia be between Germany and Russia, and they are being occupied by Russia. And the idea that like those two need to defeat each other so that our land can be free again is like, that's not like, you know, just like a hypothetical. And I'm like, I'm like, okay, if I read this story and you were like told a magical version of Germany versus Russia, where like the Latvians who were like, yeah, fight each other, were the baddies, it'd be like, seriously?
yeah, that's like very interesting. Yeah. And like I think PJ was saying, like the advantage of Sanderson is you can do allegory, like you can't, the problem with fantasy and the advantage of fantasy is you can't fully remove it from our earthly experience, you know? But yeah, I really don't have an answer for that. I'd be really curious. I'm hoping if people watch this, they can chime in on the comments just because I'm very curious about continuing that discussion. But yeah, it's very, you know, I just didn't think about it when I read it. So hard to say. And this, in fairness, here's what we'll say. Someday there is a Warbreaker sequel. I have asked Sanderson personally about this when I met him because I loved Warbreaker so much, but it's very far away. I don't know if it'll deal with it. Right now, I personally do not think it was purposeful. I do not personally think it was like we weren't supposed to consider them bad guys because I feel like all our main characters think they are. So why wouldn't we as readers? But if it gets re-explored in the second novel, I will let you know, Liana, and I will tell you how it turns out, and then we can then we can talk about there. Sanderson actually wrote Warbreaker pretty early, so I mean that could be a consideration because I think it was published.
Well, if it did get addressed in the second book, then my eternal question would be like, because he planned to address this always, or because he was like, oopsie doopsie, I did racism there.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be maybe more like that. I mean, I don't know. He's the good news is that he's very open about that stuff, and he has said it. Like, there's stuff that he's like, I had to go back and fix this because it wasn't great. And so, like, at least there's honestly, yeah. So this was published in 2009, and I'm pretty sure it was written in 2006. I remember reading. So I do think it's one of his newer ones. But I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, and so this is what I was thinking too. There's also very little chance we'll hear about it, but I'm just curious if we ever hear about them again. I will let you know, and I will tell you how it is, if it is worse or better.
Like in a TBR swap 5 years from now, you'd be like, Warbreaker 2!
No. Well, it depends. Like, what if I dislike Warbreaker 2 and I'm like, Liana, you should read it because I disliked it? I don't think that's going to happen. But I also don't think Warbreaker 2 is coming in 5 years. It's more like 15 years. But maybe in 15 years, you'll feel good about it. I mean, yeah, we don't need to turn this into a Sanderson conversation with Liana here. Well, Nightblood's the protagonist, but also they said Vivenna because he's talked about how he thinks people will be sad that we follow Vivenna instead of Siri. Anyway, it's newer. That book that's almost 5 years old. No, 2009 was more than 5 years ago, Pete. 2009 was...
Oh, he's corrected it to 15.
Oh, 15. Okay, yeah. 15 is a long time. Yeah, I don't think any of the other books there's really spoilers we could talk about because the short stories, like, you don't really want to spoil.
Yeah, especially
spoiling it helps.
That's the thing too. Like when I post negative reviews and I'm like, or I'm gonna do it full spoilers. So I'm like, you shouldn't read it anyway. So here's why.
Yeah.
Whereas like a book that I like, I'm like, no spoilers. You have to read it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, I think everyone knew we were going to do full spoilers on Warbreaker. But like Paper Menagerie, you might as well just go read it. Especially like you could just read the title story. It's for free online. I'm pretty sure like most of these you can find online because that's usually how short stories get published.
And apparently these are all blog posts online, so you can find these.
You could go find those. And again, spoiling those wouldn't really mean anything. So
I was about to say, so a book that we agree on is Jade City, another book in which there are a lot of characters doing questionable things, but at no point do you feel like Fonda Lee is like, I am condoning all of these behaviors.
He did get married while writing Warbreaker. That is true. Jade City. It is getting late because we started this so late. So maybe not super long. And we will tell everyone Jade City spoilers. So if you haven't read Jade City, maybe get off. Actually, what I want to say, this is not a spoiler because Liana isn't here yet, but I got to chapter 21 of Jade War. And if you know what chapter 21 is on Jade War, anyone listening, please message me because I was telling Liana I was having a hard time feeling invested in Jade War. And after chapter 21, I'm in.
Apparently there's a turnaround.
There's a turnaround in chapter 21. Please do. I just really want everyone to read the Paper Menagerie.
But like pick a day that like you're not already very sad. Like don't pick it up like, oh, I'm sad. I need to cheer up. I need to read a good book. That'll make no.
Well, also Liana read it in one day.
I don't recommend doing that.
Which I definitely didn't. Not because I didn't want to. Like I could have sat down and read it because it was so interesting, but because I was emotionally distracted. That I had
an emotional roller coaster.
I had to take breaks. Any tips you have for reading faster? Practice.
Audiobooks.
Jade City. I knew it was so funny because there were several people who were like, Leanna's just gonna like be about Jade City. And I was like, you guys are insane. Leanna's gonna
only you know me.
I know. And then when you were like, this is the best book, I was like, correct. I am correct.
Yep.
Okay. You do know what I'm talking about. That's all I'm gonna say. Here's the thing. Okay, let's talk about this. Who was the character that you're like the most rooting for in Jade City? Not because this is like Abercrombie rooting for. You don't have to justify. I don't care if they're a bad person. Who's the person you're like, I like this person. I like this.
Hilo.
Okay, so that's everybody, but that's the incorrect choice. It's Lan. Like,
well,
it's so funny to me because everyone's like, but Hilo, everyone's so much more emotional. And I'm like, Hilo is too chaotic for me. I cannot handle the chaos that is Hilo. Like Lan, nice, sturdy, steady, pillar, Lan.
I mean, pillar does describe Lan. It does not describe Hilo.
It does not describe Hilo.
Lan is very reliable.
Yeah, and I do joke, like I always like the reliable character. Like, you know when there's those shows or books, mostly TV shows, that they always have like the love triangles between the two men and the girl or woman, excuse me. And like good examples of this would be like Jane the Virgin. Have you ever seen Jane the Virgin?
I mean, I've heard of it, but
yeah, I only watched a couple seasons. I never make it far in these shows when I end up watching them. Vampire Diaries.
Yeah, I watched Vampire Diaries.
Okay, I watched a couple seasons. Anyway, those kinds of shows, I always want the more reliable person. And every other person I know always wants like the sexy, romantic.
I mean, personally, I am team Klaus. So
for Elena?
For I want more of that character.
Everyone is team Klaus because I also was team Klaus until they actually made the show with more Klaus and it wasn't good. But yes, I'll agree with you there. But I'm just saying, like, everyone was like, Damien's so hot and he's the better one. And I'm like, but there's like Stefan or whatever his name was. He's like reliable. Like, that's better. And I was like that in Jane the Virgin. And I never win. The character always ends up with the person I don't want because I just like reliable. Anyway.
So this is spoilery for a series that you will never read, but I feel like
love Andon too. How did you feel about Andon?
Yeah.
Sorry, then.
Yeah, I like Andon, but most of these I just really like their dynamics together, like the way they play off of each other. So like I just like the family drama is
Hilo
so good.
To make Lan interesting.
Yeah,
like you need them together.
Well,
to
Hilo
be-
is like the catalyst that makes everyone more interesting because he just shows up and starts wrecking everything, and they
a
all have to
wrecking
react
ball.
to that.
But what were you
He's
gonna
like the
say?
Tasmanian devil, just like shows up and starts.
What was see, I'm destined to be alone
Okay,
on the
but so
path.
you're never gonna read this series. I don't feel like anyone in the chat would care about this series if they haven't read it already. But the Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare, which
Oh,
like
I
I'm pretty
absolutely
sure
will not be reading that. You know what? I watched a great takedown of that movie though. Wasn't
they
it a
didn't
really
do
good movie?
they did the Mortal Instruments. That's like her
Oh,
first series. And
oh,
like I've the first thing I ever read was the Infernal Devices, and I didn't really know that it was like connected to other stuff. And that's like a prequel set in the Victorian era. So like you're supposed to read the main books first and then read that prequel, so you'll like
oh.
get because they're supposed to be like the ancestors of some of the characters from the main series. I didn't know any of that. I just read that series by itself, and then later, because I liked it so much, I wanted to read her other books, and I have not liked really anything else that I've read from her since. So I'm just like, okay, apparently I just like the Infernal Devices. So, but that's it has a love triangle, and it's one of the only love triangles I've ever liked because it's a true triangle where all three people care about each other deeply, and that's why it's really heartbreaking because like both of the boys are like this in the universe of these books. There's like a platonic soulmate that you're kind of like bonded to, and that's what they are to each other, but they're both in love with the same girl, and she loves both of them, and like no one wants to hurt anybody. They all love
Described
each
this
other.
to me before. Wait, we've done a lot of voice
Yeah.
messages about this before. You have for sure broke
But
this down
so
for
like
me.
even though I liked all three of them, well, she's kind of boring, but I liked both of the boys, and I was like, if you want her, I want that for you because that's what you want. It'll make you happy. But also between the two boys, one of them is like the more wild card bad boy Damon type, and the other one is like steady and kind and loving and the best friend you could ever have. And he was the one that like I really was rooting for, even though like there's no winning in this situation, everyone loses. But I was like, but if I have to choose, it's him. And because like you said, that one never wins, right? So then like, and he's also like a magical kind of terminally ill, which makes it even sadder. And so like I just the whole time I was like weeping reading the third book because I was like, there's no way he's the one. There's no way he's endgame. He's probably gonna like die tragically.
Isn't this
There's
the book
no
where she
way.
gets Isn't this the book where she gets to be with both of them technically, like one in the future? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so stupid. I'm so glad you told me about that. You know I'd never read that.
But it's because of you, like the same thing where I was like, it's not because of how the
Yeah.
story is going. It's because I know what types these are, and one is the bad boy, and one is the nice boy, and he will lose, and he's the one I love. And I was like, he's gonna lose, he's gonna die. There's no way she's ending up with him. This is devastating.
They said they did Lander. I will say in Jade City, I don't know what's going on with my camera. I could not believe that Land just died. I was like, well, he's not gonna die. And then he was dead. And it was like, and Zach was reading it, and Zach was like, oh, Land's not gonna die. And I was like, uh-huh.
I thought that they would that he would die like maybe by the end of the book. It surprised me that it was like a mid-book thing.
Well, Zach was just convinced because she puts those like God chapters, like those really short, like historical
About the religions of the
the religions, and it was about the guy like coming back for a day. So she was like, he was like, oh, this is a metaphor, and Land's not really dead, and he's gonna come back, you know.
Well, even within that chapter, like I didn't really think he was dead. I was like, well, there was no body. Like they said he fell in the water. I was like, okay, so
that's how I
dead.
felt.
But then they buried his body. I was like, oh, I guess he's dead.
Yeah, I was really annoyed about him going down with Shine. I felt like it didn't seem like Lan. And at first I was like, I originally thought he was getting fake Jade to pretend he was wearing Jade. But then like someone pointed out it's true. They could sense his aura and they would know that it was fake. But yeah, that was really tough for me to read. Oh, I'm glad I wasn't the only one who thought that. I was like, that makes so much smarter sense. But the whole thing is pretty heartbreaking. But yeah, it's good. And Jade War now is wild. And we'll probably agree on those books. So
very hopeful.
That's good news. It's been almost 2 hours. It's late.
And apparently I need to go read Jade War.
Yeah, you need to go read Jade War, get to chapter 21. You know what? What a great just statement in general to end on. Don't do drugs, kids. And I agree. I like it when people kill main characters, even though he was my favorite, because then
to tie
the stakes were so much higher.
To tie this back into what we were actually supposed to be talking about tonight, I messaged you about Warbreaker when I started it because I had just finished Jade City. And like when they absorbed a breath and it like heightened their senses, I was like, oh, so they put on some Jade. Like,
oh yeah,
like that's where my head is at. She was like, same, I get it. I know what we're doing here.
So let's see. Overall, you loved 1, you were meh about 2, and
I'm gonna
strongly disliked 1.
I'm gonna rank them. Actually, I think this is how they were stacked originally. They are ranked by size and by
they are ranked by size and how much you liked them. Yeah, I would say it was like, I know you didn't do star ratings. It was probably like 5, 3, 1, kind of. If you did a
well, like 5 for sure. Like I don't have any like, oh, I don't know what to rate it. Like, yeah, give it 6.
I know the rest of you're confused about rating, which is fair. That's fine. What's interesting so tomorrow on Leanna's channel at 6 p.m. I will be reviewing the 4 books that she gave me, and I think I have similar experiences with all 4 books that you had with my 4 books. Like, I think I could almost 1-to-1 how you felt about books, maybe map how I felt about books, but just maybe slightly more positive.
Well, you are the optimist. We're being on brand.
I am the optimist.
I also didn't purposely choose a book that I thought you would hate. That helped my average.
That's fair. And I did that. That was on me. I did that. I did.
But also, without saying which one, the one that like was the last one to make it into the cut, that was like the slot that I was like, I have a few that I have 3 down for sure. I know those 3. And the 4th one that I was like, I have a few. Which one am I going to pick for the 4th slot? So that's the one that I was like, okay, this one. And that's the one I think that you liked. Not maybe, I don't know if it's the absolute least, but like you didn't like it as much. I was like, okay, that one was the one that I was like, it's one of these.
Yeah, probably, but I didn't hate it. Like I didn't hate any of the books you gave me. I will say that. Like I didn't hate any of the books. It was just more like, okay. I wanted to read it, but like,
so it'll be a nice, boring live. No one come watch it.
There will be some takes, and you'll just have to find out what they are tomorrow at 6 p.m. We're keeping that one at 6 p.m. so it's not so late for everybody. But thank you for joining and talking about those books. It was very fun. The biggest problem I had with picking books for you.
Oh, it was like with what I was saying tonight. And I was like,
I don't care about what you said. I was just gonna say, you just own so many books. So it was really hard because there were several books I was gonna give you that you already had on your physical TBR. So that did limit me in a way that you were not limited because I don't buy books.
Well, I'm curious. So like, was there like one specifically that you were like, oh, dang it, she owns it?
I'm trying to think. There was one, but I honestly, I'd have to go look at my list because I can't remember now. Because I made a list of a bunch of books and a bunch of them you owned. And so that made it slightly harder. I'm trying to think. There was like 2, I think, that you owned, but I can't remember. I'd have to go look at the sticky. But anyway, it was very fun. Thank you for coming on and being a good sport about talking about things. Thank you, everyone in the live who was nice. Everyone was nice. We didn't have to block anyone. It was great. So I appreciate that.
I think it helps that by now people know it's not like they're going to be surprised. Like,
right. They're not going to be surprised by it, coming in. And that's what you guys should just know going in to ours tomorrow, that it may also be hurtful. These aren't meant to be happy lives. They are the Paper Menagerie of our lives. They may be hurtful.
I'll just update the thumbnail with like some images from me from the Paper Menagerie vlog with like tears streaming down my face.
Well, it was funny because I was watching that while I was cleaning up dinner tonight. And so I just I wasn't watching it. I was just listening to it. And
you
Zach
knew I was
over. Well, yeah. And Zach came over and was like, what? Why is Leanna sobbing? Because he couldn't hear it. He's just like, what are you watching?
It's your fault.
I'm sobbing. She read the Paper Menagerie and he's like, oh, you were sobbing when you read that. And I was like, correct. So anyway.
You just told him that you made me cry because I
did make you cry and I'm not sad about it. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining. See you tomorrow.